Good morning, everyone. And today is the grand finale of this retreat. I hope you are ready for that. So we're going to look at the Anapanasati Sutta and take it all the way to awakening, to the very kind of end of the Buddhist path, and to see how that works, how actually the very humble breath can take you all the way to awakening. It's kind of extraordinary way to think about it. And in some ways you can argue that the Anapanasati Sutta we should read it first, but it actually is quite profound, this whole idea of mindfulness of breathing, and this is what you will see as we go through this. And it's one of the very, I would consider, important suttas in the paṭicca. And one of the things I haven't really talked about is how do you decide what is an important sutta. Sometimes you will hear all kind of things, sutta-retreat sutta is really important, or this particular sutta, or maybe the Dhammacakka is very important. And how is there a neutral way of deciding this? And one way that I mentioned before is to see what the Buddha called his own teachings, the 37 aids to awakening, the 37 paṭicca-samuppāda. There's one way of thinking about it. But that's kind of everything, so it doesn't really point to any specific suttas. Another way of doing it, which I often use, is the idea that a sutta that is repeated really frequently, that you see again and again, that must be significant, that must be important, because it means the Buddha would have taught it to many different audiences in many different places and different kind of people, bhikkhunis, bhikkhus, lay people, everyone really, strangers and peoples of other religions, all these kind of things. And Anapanasati is one of these things that you find in a number of places, and there is a whole collection of suttas on Anapanasati in the Samyutta Nikaya. But the main one is found in the Majjhima Nikaya, and that's the one we will have a look at today, Majjhima Nikaya number 118. I will not start from the beginning of the sutta, whatever you have in front of you, it starts at the very beginning. I'm going to skip the first couple of pages or whatever it is, and go straight to where the actual meditation instructions begin there. Where it says, mendicants, when mindfulness of breathing is developed and cultivated, it is very fruitful and beneficial. That's where I will start. So it's quite a long way down the sutta. And so let's just get going. That's what the Buddha starts off by saying, and then he says, mindfulness of breathing, when developed and cultivated, fulfills the 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, the 4 sati-paṭṭhanas. The 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, when developed and cultivated, fulfill the 7 awakening factors. The 7 awakening factors, when developed and cultivated, fulfill knowledge and freedom. So this is very similar to what we saw before in that sequence where it asks what is the cause, what is the condition for freedom and knowledge, and it says the 7 awakening factors. What was the cause for that? Well, actually the 4 sati-paṭṭhanas. And this then talks about what, again, is the fulfillment of the 4 sati-paṭṭhanas, and it is the mindfulness breathing. So what this means, this particular statement, is that mindfulness of breathing on its own takes you all the way to the end of the path, the final knowledge and freedom at the end of the path. All you have to do is watch the breath. Isn't that great? So easy. Run it. Only watching the breath, bang, you're awakened already. That's kind of so easy, and yet not so easy. This is one of those fascinating things about the Buddhist path. It's actually pretty straightforward. I think once you are an arahant, I think when you look back, you think, why isn't everyone an arahant? It's so obvious. This is the way the world is. Why is everyone walking around in the fog all the time? The dream, as we have seen, all of these similes for what actually ordinary life is like. And it actually is very simple and straightforward, but there's all these blockages on the path, and that's why we can't get through it. All these hindrances, all this delusion on our part. It's not difficult. It just takes this commitment to the practice, and that commitment, that is the hard part. And I will talk a little bit about at the very end of this whole thing, how to sustain the practice, how to have that commitment. You know the answer already, I'm just going to kind of reinforce that a little bit. So very fruitful, yeah, it takes you all the way to the very end. The 4 kinds of mindfulness meditation, the 4 satipatthanas are fulfilled by practicing mindfulness or breathing. You don't need anything else. You don't need to watch the sensations in the body. You don't need to kind of just keep watching your mental qualities and these kind of things. You can do that if you want, but you don't actually have to. Come back to the breath. And that is the message here. And I don't know, I always found it very fascinating. It is, you know, all of these kind of various practices that we hear about, watching the sensations in the body and watching the mind states that is also done in various kind of satipatthana practice. It's not necessarily wrong. I think it maybe, you know, it may very well fall within the idea of satipatthana. But even though it may be correct from a certain perspective, it is not what the Buddha emphasized. Yeah? There is nowhere in the sutras where the Buddha emphasizes the idea of just being aware of sensations in the body or sensations in general. It is not something that is kind of singled out as a meditation object. It is derived from the Satipatthana Sutta, but doesn't really have any support beyond that. And that derivation, as I mentioned before, itself is not entirely unproblematic. You know, it's not wrong necessarily, but it is a particular interpretation of what is happening there. And the same thing with watching the mind all the time. To me, that is more akin to sense restraint than actually akin to citta-retreat. Again, it's kind of a common thing done in Satipatthana world. So there is one way that the Buddha always recommends to fulfill Satipatthana. Yeah, and if there's one way recommended by the Buddha, I say that is what we should probably do. That is what we should focus on. And that way is mindfulness of breathing. That is how you fulfill all of these things. Because when you read the Satipatthana Sutta, it is not entirely clear how you do it. Yeah, it says that you are contemplate the feelings, Vedana-nupassana. You contemplate the mind, the citta-nupassana. That's all very good and well. You contemplate this, but exactly how do you do it? What is the framework? What is the broader idea behind this? It's not really mentioned anywhere, but here it is mentioned. And here the Buddha gives that framework. That framework is mindfulness of breathing. So to me, it seems this is the obvious way we should actually be doing this practice. And for historical reasons, it has come down in different ways. And I don't want to criticize people and say that other people have got it wrong. And maybe what they do is fine and they can give you great results. And of course, down the track, someone is going to say exactly the same thing about, what I said. They're going to say, what is he talking about? Yeah, or look at these sutras here, they said the exact opposite. It's always like that. You always kind of move on. But I think nevertheless, I think the general idea of getting the answer from the sutras about how you do this, that general idea is correct. Then we can, of course, refine how we read the sutras over time, which is good. And it's good to do that. It's good to kind of have some disagreements and not kind of heated disagreement, but at least discussions, because that is how we advance understanding and knowledge of this practice. So, and then, of course, the 4 satipatthanas, then they fulfill the 7 awakening factors, which takes you all the way to the jhanas and all the way to upekkha, all the way to the very end of the path. And so mindfulness of breathing takes you to the jhana states. And of course, then you are in the vicinity of Nibbana already. It's so close to Nibbana, all you need is that right view, the spark of right view, together with the profundity of the jhanas, and it all comes together in knowledge and vision at the end of the path. So it's kind of nice, yeah? The Buddha says very fruitful and beneficial. Well, if the Buddha says very fruitful and beneficial, well, that usually means really, really fruitful. It means the end of the path, basically. Okay, so let's now get into this, how this is done now. So how is mindfulness of breathing developed and cultivated to be very fruitful and beneficial? It is when a mendicant, a bhikkhu, a bhikkhuni, an upasika, and even non-upasakas and upasakas, everyone basically, have gone to a wilderness, to the root of a tree, or to an empty hut. They sit down cross-legged with the body straight and establish mindfulness right there. Just mindful, they breathe in, mindful, they breathe out. So here are the prerequisites for mindfulness of breathing. Sometimes the most important instructions are found in the prerequisites. And the first thing that you see here straight away is gone to the wilderness, gone to the root of a tree, gone to an empty hut. As I was saying before, when you really do profound meditation, the idea of seclusion is always found in the suttas. And so here you have this idea of seclusion. You withdraw into the forest. And you see this in the suttas everywhere, after the meal, after the pitta bath in the morning, the Buddha or the other monastics, they withdraw into the forest. That is true both for the bhikkhunis and the bhikkhus. Bhikkhus also go into the forest to meditate after the meal. So this is a kind of the idea of seclusion. Why? Because if this meditation really is going to take you all the way, you need that withdrawal from society. It's already a very important starting point here. And as I mentioned before, the idea of kaya viveka, seclusion of the body, leads to the chitta viveka, seclusion of the mind. And then they sit down. Next thing you sit down, nisiddhitva, nisidati, the Bali. Real meditation happens in sitting posture. Satipatthana is a sitting meditation practice. You can do walking meditation, but it's slightly different. In the suttas, when you talk about walking meditation, it's called chankama in Pali, or chankamati, they walk up and down. It usually is not talked about as meditation. They just say they walk up and down. It doesn't say that you watch the breath. It doesn't really say what you do. It just says the monks walk up and down. And the reason for that, I think, is because when you walk up and down, the mind should be much more free, much more, not necessarily focused on any particular subject. You can focus it if you wish. You can do all kinds of things. But very often, walking meditation goes with contemplation, with reflection, because you are already moving the body. Maybe you're doing reciting of the suttas. Maybe you're doing metta practice or overcoming hindrances, these things. But you don't normally do mindfulness of breathing when walking. The deep meditation, the real samatha meditation, happens in the sitting posture. You sit down, you sit cross-legged. If you don't sit cross-legged, you can't be enlightened. That is pretty harsh. Is that true? I don't think it's true, actually. Sometimes people will say, well, it says in the suttas, it says cross-legged, you go to sit cross-legged. But actually, I think the reason why it says that is because it is a very nice posture. Once you get used to it, if you are comfortable in the sitting posture cross-legged, please sit cross-legged. But if you're not comfortable in the cross-legged posture, I would not recommend it. Because the most important thing in the meditation is to let go of the body, make the body disappear. It's not body contemplation, it is breath meditation. And if you cannot let go of the body because the body is uncomfortable, it's going to be a hindrance for you in your practice. So make sure being comfortable is more important than sitting cross-legged. Keep in mind that in ancient India, sitting cross-legged was probably very common. People would sit cross-legged on the ground all the time. This was kind of a common practice. Even in many countries, even in Asia today, if you come from the rural parts maybe, or the poor parts of some places in Asia, people still sit cross-legged very commonly on the ground. But for most people who have grown up in the present day, in the modern world, don't really sit on the ground. We use chairs, we use all these kind of things. And because of that, our joints, the hip joints and whatever else it is, are not really used to sitting cross-legged. So take whatever works, whatever is comfortable. Use a little meditation stools. Sit in a way that is suitable for you. Sometimes you can lean against the wall in the beginning. Sit in a chair if you want to. Do what works, what is comfortable, where you can find the ease of the body. The body is not prominent. So that is really the most important thing. If you can sit cross-legged, it is very useful, it is very nice, it's very comfortable. If you can't, that's perfectly okay. Palanka is the Pali word here, and it means cross-legged. with the body straight, ujjukaya. Yeah? And one of the things you will notice is that when mindfulness arises, it feels quite nice to have a straight body, because it kind of, it lends itself to the sharpness of the mind. But again, don't try to force yourself to sit straight. Sometimes you may feel a bit tired, you may feel a bit, you're not really ready to meditate in a way. Then just relax, sit back, lean against the wall, and wait for the mind to become ready. Could do a bit of walking meditation or whatever. Then when the mind is ready, then straighten the body. Ajahn Brahmali, who is one of the, as far as I know, one of the really great meditators in the world, it really is amazing. And he says that he, very often when he is tired, he doesn't sit straight away. He leans against the wall. He allows the tiredness to kind of fade away, and then waits for the mind to be ready. Then, when the mind is ready, he kind of straightens up the body. It kind of happens naturally. You can feel that it feels right when you do it. If you force yourself too much to sit straight when the mind is not ready, when you're tired, feeling a bit slothful or whatever, it's going to be counterproductive, because the mind is going to rebel a little bit against that, because you have to use force. Force is always a thing which tends to tire the mind out, which goes against feeling at ease and feeling natural in meditation. And then you establish mindfulness right there. And this is one of these little phrases that is much discussed in the suttas. Paṭicca-samuppāda sati upatapetra. Paṭicca, what does this actually mean? Mukha can mean the face or the mouth. And this word, paṭicca, seems to mean something like in the present, in the kind of in the physical, in this physical space, not thinking about kind of somewhere far away. And also in the present, of course, because it's sati, it means in the present time. So present time and present space seems to be roughly what this refers to. So you establish mindfulness right there, so right in the present time and space. And this, of course, is important. Before you start watching the breath, you establish mindfulness. And this is what it says in having, the Pali says literally, having established mindfulness, then you start watching the breath. The purpose of mindfulness of breathing is not to give rise to mindfulness. The purpose of mindfulness of breathing is to use the mindfulness that has been established to watch the breath. So again, so in other words, when you sit down, am I mindful or not? How do I get to mindfulness? Don't watch the breath straight away. Allow the hindrances to die down. Do a bit of metta, overcome that ill will, whatever it is in the mind. If the mind is slothful, give it time to clear up, whatever it is. And very often you will find that in the long run, what gives rise to mindfulness in the long run is always the preliminary practices, the 6 first factors of the Noble Eightfold Path. This is why they are so important. Keeping practicing those things. And then when you sit down, when the present moment is the pleasant moment, as they say, they is Ajahn Brahmali, then this will work far, far better. So there is like the longer term, the distant supports for mindfulness, and then there is the immediate supports that you can do in the present, which are, both of them are important. So you establish that mindfulness, right there, right in front of you, right in this present moment. And then you watch the breath. And then comes the pretty interesting question, where exactly do you watch the breath? And you will hear very different things from different teachers. And one of the typical things that you will hear, the standard thing that you will hear about where to watch the breath, tip of the nose or the upper lip. And why does everyone say that? Because that's what the commentaries say. Everything in the kind of, it comes from the commentaries very often. We are more like following the commentaries often than the suttas. The sutta says nasaka. The commentary says nasaka. Nasa is nose, related to the English word nose, by the way. Nasa, nose, sound the same. Le nez en français. Vous comprenez? Le nez, no? The same word, right? N-E-S. Nes in Norwegian. How do you say in German again? Nase, right? Yeah, nase. So it's all the same, right? It's all the same language. So the tip of the nose, it says the commentary, agga is nose, the tip, So, but that is not found in the suttas. Then you find certain traditions of Buddhism essentially wash your belly, yeah, right? Wash your belly. That's another kind of famous way of watching the breath according to the traditional ways of doing things. But what does the sutta say? The sutta does not really make any direct, doesn't place the breath in the body anywhere. It doesn't say that it is directed to any particular place in the body. Yeah? And so I've always been, in that case, I've always followed the way Ajahn Brahmali teaches breath meditation. Ajahn Brahmali is a very successful meditator. I think it's quite, for me, quite natural to do that, and it fits with the way the sutta works. You're not aware of any particular part of the body. Instead, you're just aware of the breath. Yeah, you can actually be aware of the breath going in, the breath going out, without placing it on any part of the body. Yeah? And of course, there is some body awareness there. It does relate to the body somewhere, somehow. But don't worry about that. Don't worry about the relation to the body. Just be aware of the breath going in, the breath going out. That is really what you need to do. And it's kind of nice because at the beginning of breath meditation, your mind is not yet 100% focused. It's still a little bit kind of blurry, maybe, a little bit scattered, not 100% of the breath. And because of that, it is nice to have that slightly more expansive mindfulness when you start out. Okay, the breath, wherever it is, yeah, rather than a pinpoint focus straight away. Yeah. So I think that is a very good way of doing it. And I would recommend that sort of practice. We have a broader attention on the breath rather than a very narrow one. And then it says, just mindful, they breathe in, mindful, they breathe out. Now you're ready to do the mindfulness of breathing. And you will notice one little word there, the word just mindful. It is found in the Pali, it's eva. It is one of these little words that have a couple of different meanings. But one of the important meanings of that word is just, yeah, just like in English. And so what does it mean in this context? Just mindful. Well, the way I understand it is that you don't actually have to put in any effort, maybe a little bit of effort, no willpower, yeah, to force your mind onto the breath. No real effort to kind of focus on the breath. The idea is that if you have already established mindfulness, all you have to do is actually start to be aware of the breath, because the breath is there, mindfulness is there, but it's kind of automatic. Yeah, you don't need that willpower anymore, so you are just mindful. Maybe I'm overinterpreting that little word because it's a tiny little word, eva, but it does mean just in the suttas, and it is quite possible that that is what actually is meant here, because you are ready for the mindfulness of breathing. Sometimes you have to be careful not to over-interpret the suttas, to read things into them, but not actually there. There's always a danger. But that is my preferred understanding of that. So now you are just mindful, you breathe in, you breathe out, then you come to the real exercise of mindfulness of breathing. Yeah? And this is how it is described here. Now, mindfulness of breathing is divided into 4 parts. And each of those 4 parts is divided into 4 subparts. So 4 times 4, 16 aspects altogether. Yeah, mindfulness of breathing. Yeah. So the first, they are called tetrads. So 4 tetrads. And so the first tetrad is like this. And this is equivalent to the kaya nupassana, the body contemplation in the Satipatthana Sutta. This is what it sounds like. Yeah. When breathing in heavily, or you could say long, the long breath, they know I am breathing in heavily. When breathing out heavily, they know I am breathing out heavily. When breathing in lightly, they know I am breathing in lightly. When breathing out lightly, they know I am breathing out lightly. They practice in breathing, experiencing the whole body. They practice breathing out, experiencing the whole body. They practicing breathing in, stilling the body's motion. They practice breathing out, stilling the body's motion. This is body contemplation. Yeah? And you will notice it is all about the breath. Yeah? all body contemplation can be done through the breath, because obviously the breath is tied up with the body, so it cannot make sense. And it starts off with a long breath, or the heavy breath. And it starts off with saying, you know, the long breath and the heavy breath. In other words, you have awareness of it. You know it is there. Yeah? No need to do anything. It's just knowledge of the heavy breath. So when you start out meditating the breath and you are relaxed, the breath is quite naturally long. Yeah? It's kind of an ordinary, relaxed, long breath as you're breathing in there. So this starts off. Normally, this is how you will experience the development of the breath meditation, starting out to be fairly long. You are aware of that. And then as the meditation develops, as you are calming down, the breath often gets shorter. So long and then shorter, probably because you need less oxygen. Yeah, you are kind of just relaxing more. So the breath becomes shorter as you go on. Yeah, this is a kind of a normal, fairly usual experience of what is happening. And then when you carry on with the breath meditation, it gets more, it gets deeper and deeper as you go along. You just have to wait very often, allow things to calm down. As you watch the breath, because you're not really allowing the defilements to come up, the defilements need to be fed to remain. If you don't feel the defilements, if you're just aware of the breath, the defilements fade away. And the breath, the whole experience calms down. Yeah? So the next step then is that you practice breathing in, experiencing the whole body then. You will notice a small little interesting thing there in the Pali. Previous one you said, they know this. Now you say you practice. So why this thing then? You will notice here how I look at almost every word of the Pali. And the reason is because I'm assuming that every word is meaningful. That's my assumption. Sometimes, again, that can go too far, because maybe every word is not meaningful, but that's my assumption. So I look at every word. So why does it go from knowing to practice? When it sounds like practice, it may sound like you are doing something willful. Yeah, you are trying something. You're trying to do something. Practice is often about trying things. But the way I understand it here, because it says just mindful at the beginning, practice means, it doesn't mean that you try anything. It just means that it takes time for you to be able to experience the whole body. It takes time. You have to wait. You have to be patient to allow your mindfulness to expand to the point where you can be aware of what is here called paṭicca-samuppāda, experiencing the whole body. So practice here, it's an important point. It doesn't mean that you try these things. It just means it takes time, because this is not natural straight away to have this broad awareness. The first one saying no, because it happens straight away. And straight away when you are mindful, this is what happens. So what does experiencing the whole body mean? And this is another controversial thing. It's amazing how many little controversial things there are in kind of just these little passages. And of course, the reason is because everyone takes these passages as their own, as very important. So, whole body, sattva, kaya, paṭicca-samuppāda, means to experience. Kaya is body. And often this is understood as the whole physical body, so that you put your experience onto the whole body. But I, again, following Ajahn Brahmali, following the commentaries, following actually what it says in this particular sutta, I think it is fairly obvious that it actually means the whole breath body, the whole breath. Because again, the word kaya doesn't really mean physical body. It means an assortment of phenomena coming together as a group, that kind of body, a body of things coming together. So again, it's a little bit misleading, in my opinion, to translate it as body, as it does here, because it does not mean body as we normally think about it. You experience the whole phenomenon, might be better. Yeah, if you call it the whole phenomenon of breathing, then you're getting close to the actual meaning here. So what is happening here? What is happening is that as you are calming down, your breath, your meditation is heading in the right direction. You're feeling more at ease and feeling the expansion of the mindfulness and the awareness. You start to be able to be aware of more of what is going on. Mindfulness becomes sharper. Yeah, So you see the whole breath from beginning to end. You are aware of all the intermediate steps. It's no longer just breathing in, breathing out, knowing that, but your mindfulness is becoming sharper. This is the whole body of the breath, the entire phenomenon of the breath that you are aware of. And I think it is natural to think that it means the breath. We are talking about breath meditation after all. So it makes sense that we should talk about breath right here. The commentary supports that this refers to the breath meditation. Further down in the same sutta, it specifically says that this body here refers to the breath because the word body is one particular body among bodies. So to me, all the evidence points to that this means breath. So I'm always a little bit surprised that people actually still prefer to interpret it as a whole physical body. But anyway, that's my take on this. And then you calm down further, yeah? And as you calm down further, you practice breathing out, in and out, and stilling the body's motion. Kaya sankara pasampati, I think it is. Pasampaya kaya sankara. It's the same thing. Yeah, so calming down of the breath body. Yeah, calming down of the breath phenomenon. This is what is happening here. Kaya sankara is many places in the suttas specifically said that to refer to the body. He calls it here the body's motion, yeah, or the body's activity is another way of talking about it. Activity is a nice translation for sankara. So you are calming down the activity of the body. And of course, really the only activity of the body here, as you are aware of the breath, really is the breath, right? And maybe you can think of it a bit more broadly, because if the breath calms down, everything calms down. But it really refers to the calming down of the breath. How do you do that? Not by doing it, but by allowing it to happen. This whole process is a process that you allow to happen. Yeah? It happens stage by stage. All you have to do is to stand back and watch the process. And as you watch it, it happens by itself. So this is kind of a natural process. Again, take the will out of the equation as much as you can. There's always going to be a degree of will there anyway, because it's really hard to get rid of this willpower. It is always sitting there in the background, messing things up and kind of annoying you. But this thing that we take such an important part of our personality, the will, the creator, actually there comes a point where you see it as annoying. Go away, will. No, I'm going to annoy you. So you stand back and you allow things to calm down. And at this point, the meditation is already very, very nice. It doesn't take long. Once you have mindfulness established, you start to watch the breath. Because at this point, you don't have any will anymore. You don't do the meditation anymore at all. The whole meditation is completely automatic. And you will notice that as long as you do the meditation, actually, it doesn't feel nice yet. It is still kind of rough. Yeah? You feel the will is getting involved. It is not a nice experience to be aware of the breath because of the willpower. But at this point, the will is almost completely abandoned already. Thing is just happening by itself, peaceful, nice, calming down already. So very early on, this becomes quite pleasant. And here also you see one of these things that is one of the key aspects of all meditation practice. You see it already at this point, the idea of stilling, calming, pasampati, pasampayam is the word here. I think it is related to pasati, is it? I think it might be related to the word pasati, which means tranquility in general. Pasampayam, one of the two things that are the key aspects that kind of go throughout the meditation practice. The other aspect is bliss or happiness. These two key aspects. Here you see them already. So there you are. That is the body contemplation. Fulfilled and completed merely by watching the breath. Then we move on to the Vedana contemplation of feelings. So let me just read it out for you, what this sounds like. Again, 4 steps. Second tetrad, 4 steps on this one as well. They practice breathing in rapture. They practice breathing out, experiencing rapture. The practice breathing in, experiencing bliss. The practice breathing out, experiencing bliss. The practice breathing in, experiencing these emotions. The practice breathing out, experiencing these emotions. The practice breathing in, stilling these emotions. The practice breathing out, stilling these emotions. So this is kind of nice, isn't it? And one of the things you will notice, this is the completion of the Vedana Vipassana contemplation of feeling. It is all about happy feeling. Everything here is happiness. These emotions just refers back to the bliss and rapture that we saw at the beginning. So everything is like bliss and happiness. You don't have to contemplate any painful feelings at all. And by contemplating pure bliss and happiness, you are completing the contemplation of feelings. Is that great news? Yeah, no need to worry about the pain, no need to worry about anything except for joy and happiness and all of these kind of things. I think this is extraordinarily good news, and for especially for all those people who have endured lots of pain and things in the past. Actually, you don't really need to do that. It is not required. Sitting down and contemplating pain, the Buddha never really recommends that anywhere. What he recommends is understanding the painful feelings. That is actually quite different from contemplating them in this way. Because, as I said before, the understanding happens through the absence of these feelings, not by watching them. So all about rapture and happiness, all the way through, is kind of awesome. So how do we make the step from the contemplation of the breath to the contemplation of the body to the feelings? How do we go from the calm breath to experiencing rapture? This is kind of the first step in that. How do we make that bridge? And very often it happens by itself. We have been living well, we've been practicing the right way, the breath becomes calmer, and the bliss just arises. This is kind of very common, especially if you have practiced the path for a long time in the right way. And if that happens, great, no worries. Just carry on breathing, allowing everything to be. Happens as an automatic part of the process. But it doesn't always happen. There are people who kind of come to the place of a lot of peace in their breath, and they don't really have any joy in the meditation. This is quite a common experience in the world. So how do we then go from one to the next one? And this is where you can nudge the mind very, very gently. You don't want to use a lot of thinking at this point. You don't want to kind of upset the mind all that much, but you can nudge the mind to the things that we were talking about yesterday. The anusattis. Remembering the power of virtue, the power of generosity. Even the Buddha, if you're able to do that, just remember those things very gently. What these things actually mean, what they feel like, how powerful they are, how you have practiced these things, specific events you have practiced in the past, how these things are liberating, and you are doing these liberating things, how they're praised by the wise. Wow, I'm living well, I'm praised by the Buddha. Yeah, it's nice to be praised by the Buddha. Who cares what is always on the scallywag saying? The Buddha praises me. So, and this kind of gives you this uplift, emotional uplift. And that emotional uplift is exactly what you need here. And as you do that, the gladness of the mind comes about. And from that gladness comes all of these things that we're looking at here. The piti, the sukha, the what is it again? Chitta-sankara. I think it is experiencing these emotions here. So all of these things come out of this, and then they arise. And then from that very gentle nudge of the mind, not trying too hard, then this happiness is starting to arise in the mind. You breathe in, experiencing the piti, which I talked about before. The kind of the physical energy coursing through the body sometimes. The kind of very mind, there's no real difference between mind and body. It's kind of this bliss kind of coursing through the spiritual happiness that we have inside there. And it can be also much more peaceful, it can be more like a mental feeling. People experience these things in slightly different ways. But so this is the piti, the happiness, the kind of really sublime happiness that you start to feel on this path. And then again, you just carry on. You enjoy the happiness that is there, you enjoy this joy, the rapture that is there. And as you enjoy that rapture calms down. It's no longer as a corpse, yeah? It's no longer as it doesn't have so much movement to it. It calms down, becomes more still and peaceful. And this is what we mean by bliss here, the sukha. Again, it is all automatic. All you have to do is just to be aware. The more you do at this point, the more you're going to disturb this beautiful process. Calming and bliss coming together, moving forward. You practice breathing in, experiencing these emotions. This is almost just like reiterating what you have said before, citta-sankara, paṭicca-samuppāda. It doesn't really add all that much. It just says that you're experiencing these things. And then you practice breathing in, stilling these emotions, calming everything down even more. Calming and bliss coming together. All you do is stand back. And in fact, you stand back more and more as this process is happening. Because your will is kind of being withdrawn from the whole process. It's not really withdrawing it, you're just allowing it to fade away, essentially. The will, the emotions of the mind, all of that is just fading away as you do this. It's such a beautiful process. Just calm and happiness, joy, calm and happiness, all the way through this process. It's kind of extraordinary. And then comes the equivalent of the third Satipatthana. This is the citta-vipassana, the contemplation of the mind, of mental states. And again, this fulfills the idea of contemplating the mind. This is what it looks like in the here. The practice breathing in, experiencing the mind. The practice breathing out, experiencing the mind. The practice breathing in, gladdening the mind. The practice breathing out, gladdening the mind. The practice breathing in, stilling the mind. The practice breathing out, stilling the mind. The practice breathing in, freeing the mind. The practice breathing out, freeing the mind. So once again, you will notice here that it is all about positive qualities. Everything here is positive. Okay, you could argue that the first one may not look all that positive. Experience in the mind, you may think it can mean anything, but it can't really mean anything here, because we have already come to a state of great bliss. There's very limited how you can actually interpret the idea of experiencing mind here. Now again, in the Satipatthana Sutta, it talks about knowing negative states of mind, positive states of mind, all of these things. But again, here, you don't really have to worry about the negative states of mind, You can just abandon them. Don't have to try to contemplate the painful aspects of mental experience. You can leave those behind. Again, they are also contemplated through their absence rather than through their presence. Because defilements and negative states of mind cannot really be understood when they are present. Because when they are present, they are by definition deluding. They are by definition biasing the mind. So you cannot really understand them. But when they disappear, and when the bliss becomes really strong, that is when you can understand these things. That is why understanding things through its absence is always much more powerful than understanding it through its presence. This is also true in this particular case. So here we are experiencing the mind. What does that mean? This was asked before, we were talking about the mind. What is the mind? And the mind is really that thing which remains when you're liberated from the body and the five senses. And the body and the five senses, this is the physical world, and the world of physical experience. When you leave that behind, what is left is the mind. And ideally, you also want to remove the remnants of the physical world that actually exists in the mind. Because the mind takes the physical world also as its objects directly. So what is this then? So what this is well, when you notice that your mind is blissful and really happy, and the world is really fading away. Here your senses are really getting very weak. You can still see the breath in the background somewhere. You can hear things. The hearing is the last sense to disappear in meditation. That's also said in the suttas, by the way. So the world is really fading away. And very often when the world becomes very, very weak, this is where very often you will be able to see these kind of lights arising in the mind, these bright lights. And they are often called samadhi nimittas in the kind of Buddhist tradition. They don't actually call that in the suttas. but they often call that in the Buddhist traditions. In the suttas, they're often just called obasa, and obasa just means light, essentially, and the rupa as well, because the light has a form. So what you're seeing here is you're entering the world of the mind. This is a purely getting close to pure mental experience. It still has some aspect of the physical world to it, because that light has a form. That form is still related to the world, but now you're really entering the world of the mind. The world of the mind can also have some degree of form, I suppose. So this is the world of the mind. They're seeing, for most people, this is seeing these obasas, these nimittas of the mind, seeing lights. And often very beautiful lights, that you see. These are very powerful experiences. You're starting to entering a different reality when these things happen. These are really awesome experiences on the path. How do we move from the breath to the mind in this way? And sometimes you may not be able to see these lights. Maybe you're still enjoying the beautiful breath and you're enjoying the bliss and all these kind of things in your meditation. But how do you go to the point where these bright lights actually appear? Well, the thing that often stops these bright lights from appearing will be a residual attachment to the five senses. Because this is where you really start to let go of the five senses quite big time. So very often what you have to do is just to, again, remember these things when you use the mind in these states. They're very, very gentle things that you do. It's like you're nudging the mind a little bit. It's almost like you bring up the perception of the problems of the sensory world, how uninteresting the sensory world actually is. And this is why we spend so much time on the Paṭicca-samuppāda, on the downsides of the sensory world, to build up that perception inside. And at this point, all you have to do is just remember that downside almost. And as you do that, the mind will, if it is ready, release you more from that sensory world and the body. And then when you do that, then these lights can arise as a consequence. It may also be that you have simply not practiced enough. The power of the mind is not sufficient to enable you to move from the bliss to these nimittas. In which case you just have to build up more steam, energy, and power in your meditation. But if you are ready, very often this transition again happens automatically. You don't have to do anything yet. All you have to do is just to enjoy the bliss, enjoy the happiness, and then suddenly you will see some light appearing in your mind. You will see that this process just happens automatically. And so you allow it to arise in your mind. And initially, when that light appears in your mind, it can be a little bit dull or very sharp. So the idea of the next part of the process here is to allow these lights to become as sharp and powerful as possible. And this is why the next step here is the gladdening of the mind. What you're gladdening are these images that appear, these nimittas. They become more powerful. Instead of being like the moon, they become like the sun. It's sharp, more and more powerful. To the point where you don't want to see it anymore. You kind of, oh no, too bright. My eyes are going to hurt. I just spoke to someone in the interview just a couple of days ago about this. Oh no, it's too strong. It's like seeing the sun with your eyes. I just kind of, it was too much, this nimitta. But it is not dangerous. You're not going to go blind because you're not seeing this with your physical eye. You're seeing it in your mind. And your mind can take any amount of bliss. There's no limit to the amount of bliss that you can take. You may think, I can't take so much bliss, but actually you can. It's good news, isn't it? You can take almost limitless bliss and just allow it to grow. So the idea here is you allow it to grow. The sun becomes brighter and brighter and brighter, more and more powerful. This is what's happening here. So you are gladdening that nimitta. How do you gladden it? By doing nothing. By standing back, by enjoying the experience, by just remaining with what is happening. Remember, this is an automatic experience. You don't have to do anything. You have to get out of the way. You have to allow it to happen. You just allow it to happen. You just enjoy it because this is where it becomes really, it's really kind of out of this world a little bit. And then you move on to the stilling of this. The stilling and the gladdening going together as you do these things, it becomes more and more still. So again, this idea, this double thing of gladdening and instilling, going together, deeper and deeper and deeper. Samadha chitta, which means bringing the mind to samadhi. That's quite literally what it means. And then the very last step in these first 12 things, the very last step of the citta vipassana is the freeing of the mind. Vimochaya citta. And what does that mean, freeing the mind? What it means is that at this point, you are liberating the mind from all of those negative states that oppose your ability to enter deep samadhi. What is that? Well, all the hindrances disappearing completely. No more hindrances of any kind. And you will be surprised to know that you even have any hindrance at this point. You have the most blissful experience you have ever had in your life. Your mind feels utterly alert and powerful. But the hindrances are still maybe tiny, tiny, tiny. Yeah? A little bit of restlessness, so your mind is not 100% still, something like that. So tiny, tiny hindrances. And this is what you free the mind from. You free the mind completely from the five senses. The last remaining attachment, holding on to the five senses of the body, goes. You free the mind from doing, from willing. No more intentional doing in the mind at all. All of these states go at this particular point. That is why the final idea of freeing the mind actually is the entering the state of samadhi, entering the jhanas. That is really what happens at this point. How do you do it? You don't do it. You allow it to happen. This is the critical point throughout of this whole sequence. You allow the sequence to unfold in its own natural way without doing it, without trying to make it happen. So this is the first 12 steps of anapanasati. It's all equivalent to the first 3 satipatthana practices. It takes you all the way to the jhanas. Yeah, it's such a marvelous sequence. And it's just such an extraordinary thing that this is what meditation is about. Meditation is not about anything negative at all. It's only about positive things. It's only about enjoying yourself. Yeah? And we need to get out of this mindset that the spiritual path is about torture. It's a very common belief in the world. Yeah? If you look at some of the spiritual practices around the world, it is all about torturing the body. By torturing the body, you can release the beautiful spirit. But no, that is not the path of Buddhism. It is all about enjoying the path all the way throughout. Bliss begets bliss. Joy begets joy. Stillness begets stillness. One thing leading to more of the same, which is kind of extraordinary. So, what next? We haven't come to the end yet. Yeah? We've only experienced the highest bliss pretty much in the universe. So, what happens next then? And what happens next is actually also very interesting. We want to take this path all the way to the end, as I said. So what happens next is that we practice breathing in, observing impermanence, anicca. We practice breathing out, observing impermanence. We practice breathing in, observing fading away. We practice breathing out, observing fading away. We practice breathing in, observing cessation. The practice breathing out, observing cessation. The practice breathing in, observing letting go. The practice breathing out, observing letting go. So what is this all about? Well, obviously, this is about insight. Yeah? This is about understanding. But what exactly are we understanding? What is it that we are observing at this point? Impermanence is very vague. Impermanence of what exactly? And of course, the answer is of impermanence of the 5 khandhas, right? Which 5 khandhas? Well, we have just been through this process, yeah, the process of mindfulness of breathing. Now, at the very end, we will be coming to the end of that process of mindfulness of breathing. So it is that process itself, that process of mindfulness of breathing that we have just been through. That is the process of the 5 khandhas. There's a process of the 5 khandhas becoming peaceful, becoming calm, becoming joyful. When we talk about contemplation of the 5 khandhas, we're just talking about contemplation of our experience. And here, the experience is precisely the experience of a particular way of developing the mind. that is what we contemplate. That is equivalent to the contemplation of the five khandhas. People are very confused about how you contemplate the five khandhas, but it has to be based on the real experience of something. Yeah? And of course, meditation experience is really the raw data that we have to use to understand our reality. So what we do here is we look back on this experience we have had. And if that experience has taken us all the way to the freeing of the mind, it's going to be very powerful, the kind of impermanence we're able to see. If your meditation isn't that deep, maybe it only goes to experiencing bliss, but then your ability to understand impermanence is going to be less, but there's still maybe some insight you can have afterwards. If your experience is even less than that, maybe just observing the breath going in and out, well then it's going to be limited, the amount of insight that you can have. But regardless of how deep you go, you can have a little bit of idea of impermanence, looking back on the process you have been through. The deeper the process, the more powerful it's going to be, your understanding of that impermanence. Because you are actually seeing the five khandhas in action, seeing the five khandhas being impermanent. The basic idea of impermanence is just change, yeah? Things changing, the breath going from being coarse to being more refined. Yeah, the feelings changing over time, seeing pain, seeing happiness, seeing these kind of things. Your perceptions changing. Yeah? First you start off by seeing the body, then you may not see the body. And things moving around all the time. Your will changes, things that you're interested in moving around. Yeah, so just the general idea of change in experience, that is the root idea of impermanence of anicca. But anicca is much deeper than that. That is only the beginning of anicca. The second thing is the viraga. Viraga means fading away. And what that means is that there is a certain direction to the anicca. And there's a certain movement, it moves in a certain direction. Fading away means that the body is prominent to begin with, then gradually it becomes less and less and less and less. And that is the direction of anicca, the direction of impermanence. It goes in a certain way. So you see that kind of gradual movement. And of course, if it fades away, it can only really end up in one place, and that is in cessation, ending. Yeah? This is the third one of these things. So you see this in all of your five khandhas. You see this process of impermanence, fading away, and cessation. You watch the body, you see it as impermanent. Yeah? Then you see it all fades away. Eventually your breath also fades away because the breath becomes more and more refined, until eventually everything comes to a complete end, to a stop. It ceases. You see that process in your body. You see the same process with your five senses. Yeah, the sense of sight turns off fairly quickly. When you close your eyes, you can still see through the back of your eyes in a sense. But eventually the sense of sight just turns off completely. There is no more seeing going on at all. Yeah, the hearing gradually fades away as well, until the hearing also turns off. That's really just when you enter a jhana that the hearing turns off. The very, very end. You see impermanence, fading away, and cessation of the five senses. You see the feelings of the body is the same thing. Painful feelings, initially there are a little bit painful feelings there because it's always the nature of the body to have some painful feelings. You can never overcome it completely just by changing your posture. But gradually it fades away, yeah? And as the bliss kind of overcomes the mind, the painful feelings disappear completely until they too fade away and cease. Happy feelings too are changing, becoming more refined. The more coarser ones fade away, yeah? And eventually even the happy feelings ultimately they too cease completely in the fourth jhana. Your perceptions changing, what you are aware of, your world, yeah, your ideas and everything. Your perception is basically your entire experience. Perception is becomes more and more refined. Things fade away, things disappear. Your will fades away as you go deeper in meditation. And when you eventually enter a jhana state, you have no more ability to make choices. That inability to make choices means really that your will has ceased at a particular point. Consciousness is changing, yeah? Certain consciousnesses are fading away and ceasing. Sense consciousness, the ability to experience your senses completely cease when you enter a jhana state. So this is what you're doing here. This is the idea of what you're looking back. You're looking back at a process that you went through, and you're seeing this idea of fading away and ceasing. And you're starting to understand. What are you understanding when you do this? Well, what you understand as you do this, well, first of all, obviously, you're understanding impermanence. Yeah? You're understanding how these things are utterly they are just unreliable and uncertain. They can be given up completely. They're utterly impermanent. And in that process of understanding impermanence, you're also understanding suffering. Because you see that once you give these things up, you feel more happy. The reason why happiness is increasing all the way through this path is because you're giving up things. You're giving up the thinking mind, giving up the body, you're giving up the senses. And as you do all of this, as you're giving up the will, of course, and as you're doing this, all you do feel is more and more happiness, more and more bliss. So you understand suffering, you understand where suffering is, and you understand where happiness is. Everything is starting to come together very nicely. And then, of course, you also start to understand non-self. And especially as you enter the deep states of samadhi, that is where you really understand non-self, because you see that some of these things are no longer accessible to you. You can no longer see it. Yeah? Your mind has moved away. Your mind has entered a different existence called the loka dhatu, or the loka vachar, or the loka not loka, rupa, what I want to say. Rupa loka, that's what's why I couldn't get this right. You have entered the rupa loka, yeah? And this is the world where the five senses and all these things end completely. Yeah? So you enter a different reality. Yeah? And all of these things in the previous reality, because you entered a new reality, they're no longer accessible to you. Yeah? So they must be non-self, because things that you cannot access, by definition, they are non-self. You may not understand that now, but when you get there, you will understand it, because that is exactly the experience that you have when you get there. So these insights that you have at this point, they are almost automatic. You cannot really avoid seeing these things when you come out afterwards. But very often it is useful to take a bit of time just to reflect back. Yeah? Because if you get up too quickly after your meditation, you start doing whatever, then the message doesn't sink in as powerfully as if you take a bit of time to reflect it. Especially if your meditation is not so deep, then the message is not going to be so clear either. The less deep your meditation is, the more time you need to reflect on what is happening to allow the message to sink in. This is where suffering is. This is where happiness is. This is what impermanence is. This is what I should be going for. This is where the meditation works. This is how you let go. This is how you direct your mind in the right way. This is how you establish the mind in the right attitude at the start, at the beginning, to allow this process to happen. You see all of these things, and as you do that, you become gradually a master of meditation. So what happens then? What happens then is that as you do this, as you have these little insights, and these little insights that you cultivate as your meditation goes deeper, those little insights will help your meditation to go even deeper in the future, which will allow for new insights, which will allow for deeper meditation, which will allow for new insights, gradually moving forward in this way. Yeah? Like you see in the last part of the Satipatthana Sutta, the Dhamma in particular, understanding the five hindrances and the seven factors of awakening, which are the core part of the last part of the Satipatthana. You understand these qualities of mind, yeah? You see them, you reflect on them in this way, and gradually samatha-vipassana builds up together in this way, again and again and again. And when eventually you see the full cessation of these things, you see the dukkha, you see the impermanence, all that, there comes a point when you want to let go of everything, because you realize there's nothing there of any interest. And because of that, that is when craving ceasing once and for all. Because how can you crave for dukkha? How can you crave for suffering? It's impossible. Much better not to crave at all. So you give up craving itself. That is the last of these stages of the anapanasati. Paṭicca-samuppāda anupassana. Is that what it is? I'm getting confused now. Paṭicca-samuppāda, yeah. So that is then how you become an arahant at the very end. Yeah, starting off with being a stream actor and gradually taking it all the way to arahantship. by seeing the problem of craving. Why should you crave for suffering? When you understand that everything is suffering, you let go of craving instead of holding on to suffering. That is the very last part of the Anapanasati Sutta. So, then the Buddha says, let's just finish off this very last part here. He says, mindfulness of breathing, when developed and cultivated in this way, notice in this way, is very fruitful and beneficial. Yeah. So in this way, this is the way you do it. And then there comes a little paragraph there which shows you that, well, what is meant by body in this case is actually the breath. And the breath kind of is the kind of the idea of the body. So I'm going to stop with the Anapanasati Sutta there. This question goes on for quite a while because it goes on to show how the mindfulness of breathing fulfills the four satipatthanas. It then shows how the four satipatthanas fulfills the 7 factors of awakening, and how then the 7 factors of awakening finally fulfill knowledge and liberation at the very end. There's also a nice table there which I have made for you, and I actually made it for another retreat, but I wrapped it there for you as well. And I have you. Is it dark in there? So because I have all this nice colors in mind. Hold it up. Okay, so you can kind of see it. Okay, good. Yeah. So it shows the comparison between Satipatthana and Anapanasati. This will show you the overlap. Yeah, and that is, I think, really quite interesting. That particular table. It gives you a very strong feeling for how it works together. But that is the practice of Anapanasati for you, mindfulness of breathing. And it is a such an extraordinary practice. And when you know what this practice is, maybe you feel, I don't really understand any of this, I've never experienced any of these things. And some of you will have experienced some of these things. But that is not the point. The point is to have some idea of what this path can offer us. And it's just extraordinary what this path can offer us in terms of happiness and joy and meaning of life and all of these kind of things. And it kind of inspires you. At least that is what it's like for me. When I think, wow, I would like more of this. Yeah, I need more of this stuff myself. So you feel that this is so attractive. This is a draw card to make the practice work. Yeah. So don't feel discouraged by this. Rather think that, well, actually, it is all there waiting for me. If I practice in the right way, this is all will happen to me if I live in the right way. Don't look at it in a kind of a selfish way. Yeah, I will get all this. If you think like that, that's not going to work. But think of it as this beautiful path, which kind of unfolds as you do it. And of course, part of it is actually the whole idea of non-self, and being generous of spirit, and all of these kind of things. But it's there, waiting for each one of us to happen if we practice this path in the right way. That is kind of extraordinary. These teachings of the Buddha are really kind of exceptional. And I think in all the worlds of spiritual practice, you don't really find anything quite like this. Described in such detail, described with such beauty, described with such realism, because you do it. This is exactly what happens to your mind as you go through these things. There's something extraordinary about this. So this is why I like to bring it out, even though that for many people it may seem far away. Never think that you cannot do it. It's not really about you. It's about the way the khandhas work. You have 5 khandhas, you have a mind, you have a body. This is what happens, these 5 khandhas, when you do this kind of practice. There's nothing to do with you at all. So just try to stay out of it and allow the process to unfold. Then you are on the right track. So let us stop there, and at least with if you want to say sadhu?
Yeah.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Okay, excellent. So is it okay with you if we just carry on? We don't have a break because
No.
we're running short of time?
No.
No break? Everyone okay? But if you need a break, please go and take a break anyway. If you're desperate, because if you're desperate, then I know it's too hard to sit there. But we will just carry on very gently and finish off the last Q&A, and I will ask when we'll be able to kind of wrap up the retreat at the very end. Okay, let's come back to the. We only have a few minutes left. So I think it's okay. Okay, so now we are back to business. So, first question here is about dragons. Okay, so we're going to talk about dragons a little bit, and it's kind of a good start for the good start to end, whatever it is. And they are most probably so common among many cultures because when first humanoids were living here and saw their biggest fear was snakes. Savannas, okay, we're living in savannas. The biggest fear was of snakes, giant cats and carnivores, birds. So now imagine a snake with claws and wings and the superpower like breathing fire, voila, a dragon then. Yeah, maybe. But the dragons are kind of, maybe that is part. I mean, a lot of the idea of supernormal beings can be explained in these kind of ways, cultural ways, yeah? And the idea that, you know, you pray to the gods and the gods are kind of responsible for the forces of nature and all of this kind of thing. I think there's many things going on. I think it's not simply one thing. And I personally, you know, if you think that there are such beings as nagas, if they actually do exist, and I think they exist in one way or another, if they exist, then it is also likely that occasionally you will experience these things, because these are mental experiences. And people who have certain mental powers, they will be able to see these things. So if they do exist, you should also expect them to be experienceable every now and again. I know a lot of people who say they haven't seen ghosts, for example. I know people who have seen devas. I know people who have seen all of these kind of things, and people who are very reliable witnesses, not just kind of random people. And so I don't have any doubt that these things do exist. And for that reason, I think it's also quite plausible that sometimes in various cultures there will be people who have these kind of insights. But you're right, there probably are many explanations.
Have you seen it?
Have I seen the name? Any dragons? Any ghosts? I've never seen any ghosts. I will refrain from replying to that question, but okay, dear Ajahn, how might a deva appear in one's life? Thank you so much for the teachings. You get much gratitude. How do devas appear? The way that they are said to appear in the suttas, they are like a light that comes, and the light kind of becomes strong, and they are seen like that. Whether that is actually how you see that is a bit unclear, because you know normally people don't see these lights, or except maybe UFOs. Yeah. One of the interesting things is what are UFOs? Are UFOs actually? You know, they're really unexplained. So what are they? And from a Buddhist point of view, maybe they are devas. Yeah, that is one possibility. In the sutta, sometimes you hear about these kind of lower devas being nasty, doing bad things to people. This is actually what you see in the suttas. Sometimes you hear about UFOs abducting people. Maybe there's a relationship there. I don't know. So maybe that is what UFOs are, really. It's very hard to know, but that is one speculation that will certainly fit with the Buddhist worldview. So maybe UFO is if you see a UFO, maybe what you see is actually. This is one way that they can be experienced. Another way they can be experienced in meditation. Yeah. Sometimes you can experience things that may seem a little bit like a nimitta, the samadhi nimitta, experiencing a light in your mind. But sometimes those lights can actually be devas, because devas have also are bright beings, and they can actually appear like this in a meditation. especially if they want to visit you. They want to say hello, and then they kind of appear in your mind in this way. So this is normally how you would, I think, see demons. But I am not an expert in the topic. Are there any experts in how you see demons and human beings?
No, I haven't.
You haven't seen any demons? Okay. Do you have any explanations for these things? For how you see them, not see them? Okay, yeah. These topics are very sort of what's the word? Very not sure. Very kind of unusual. I mean, even among monastics, we don't actually talk about this very often. How we experience demons, so it's kind of rare. Anyway, let's move on to the next one. Dear Ajahn Brahmali, thank you. Okay, this is kind of a big letter, so I have to. That's very, very, very good. How can you escape from the ghost realm? Do you have to die as a ghost? You are a wonderful teacher. Thank you again. Okay, that's very kind of you. And we will also mention everyone else, because these retreats happen because of a lot of hard work from many people coming together. It's really when we work together and we can make this world a better place. Single individuals cannot do all that much, but when we come together in a cooperative way, that is actually when things really work out. So cooperation is always a very useful thing. How do you escape from the ghost realm then? Do you have to die as a ghost? Yeah, essentially you have to die. But these realms are often mental, so dying in these realms is quite different from dying as a human being. Sometimes dying just means disappearing from there and getting reborn somewhere else. Yeah? The devas, the way the devas die, is they say that your body is luminous, and then the luminosity starts to fade. And that's when they know they're going to die. Oh, my luminosity is fading again. See, like, no, help, I don't want to be the deva dog. Where am I going to be reborn? Among those filthy human beings. I don't want to be reborn among those filthy human beings. Human bodies are very filthy compared to deva bodies. We have to shower all the time. If we don't shower, we become stinky very quickly. Deva bodies are not like that. They're not stinky very quickly. So they really want to avoid the human realm, let alone even further down there. So you have to die as a ghost, but that often means just changing your mind state almost. And you get reborn in a higher realm. That's why transferring a marriage to the ghost realm can have very immediate effects. Yeah, you sort of just disappear and you get reborn somewhere else. So the ghost realm is interesting. If you look at the suttas, if you look at the kind of hierarchy of realms, just below the human realm is the ghost realm. And below the ghost realm is the animal realm. As the ghost realm is actually higher than the animal realm. So even though it is a realm of suffering, it is not kind of immense suffering necessarily. It really depends a little bit. It's also a very large realm in the ghost realm, because the amount of beings that get reborn there is just so enormous. It's a very common place to get reborn. So it's a very large realm with lots of variety, all kinds of things, all kinds of ghosts of various kinds. So yeah, so sometimes you just have to wait for that bad karma to come to an end. And sometimes that will happen very quickly if you have done a lot of good in your life, but there's some bad actions that lead to rebirth in the ghost realm, some dodgy thing that you did and you regret it when you die. It won't take long before you escape from it because of the general good karma. And if you have some good relatives, you have to teach your kids to make good karma for you after you die, just in case. Just in case you go to the ghost realm. But yeah, kids, remember, after dying, go to the monastery, make these offerings, do a dedication for me. So this is a wonderful thing that we can do for our ancestors. All right. Next one. Dear Ajahn, is there something like the Tibetan Book of the Dead in the EBTs? Thank you very much for your inspiring teachings. Not really. This is a very Tibetan kind of thing. The Tibetan Book of the Dead does not really found in the EBTs. The EBTs are concerned with kind of very practical issues. And when you are dead, I can't even remember the content of the Tibetan book. And I remember reading it as a layperson 30 years ago or something, but it's really kind of disappeared from my mind completely what the contents are. But there isn't that much about dying in the suttas, because dying is just kind of this natural process. And the main things that the Buddha would say about dying, make sure you make lots of good karmas. When you die, you don't die well. You go to a good destination afterwards, ideally ending everything. And one of the things to be said straight away is that this Buddhist idea that your last mind moment matters enormously when you die, that is a big exaggeration, and there's no reference to that anywhere in the suttas. This is something that you find in the commentary. It's not really a sutta thing at all. So forget about the last mind moment. When you die, relax instead. I'm always worried if you tell people, the last mind moment is really important. Yeah, if you have a slight thought of anger in the last moment, you're going to go to a really bad destination. But imagine if you tell that to people when they die, they will freak out, right? Oh, what am I going to do? It's really an unpleasant way to die if you have to think about all of these things. How can I not get angry? And the moment you're told not to get angry because you're thinking about something, guaranteed you're going to get angry, right? So it's a really bad idea. So, and it's not even true. Your last mind moment doesn't matter that much. The reason why it is said to matter so much is because of Abhidhamma ideas. Abhidhamma ideas is that you have the Juti Chitta, which is the last mind moment, and then it's followed by the paṭicca-samuppāda, the reconnecting consciousness, because there's nothing in between. Of course, the last mind moment is going to be very significant. But if there is an intermediate state, I think there is really a lot of evidence that there is some kind of intermediate state. A lot of evidence in the suttas, a lot of evidence from other schools of Buddhism, a lot of evidence from the way that we know the world. Yeah, we know that people have out-of-body experiences or near-death experiences, these kind of things. And there is this sense in all of those experiences of an intermediate state before you move on to your next life. So I think the evidence is very, very strong about that. So when you die, relax. Allow the karma, whatever you built up, just to take its course. Yeah. If you are ready, you can just relax on the deathbed. That is really the ideal there. So Buddhist ideas are very simple. Or early Buddhist ideas are very simple. They don't really delve into these things in a great detail, because the Buddha's point of view is not to describe what the world is like. The Buddha's point of view is to describe what we need to do to overcome the problems and suffering. It's about the path, not about the philosophy of what the world looks like. So the Tibetan Book of the Dead is a much later thing. Yeah? It is something that is part of Tibetan culture and interesting maybe, but not necessarily very useful as far as practice is concerned. Really. Which is my second last cup of coffee. Because we're going to have one more before I leave this afternoon. So this is to be enjoyed to the max. So again, until we get close there, which is good. Ajahn, following on from yesterday's questions about arahants being against bhikkhunis, I've heard about Mahakassapa being against bhikkhunis. Mahakassapa, which has also confused me, as I too could understand how an arahant could be anything but compassionate and supportive towards bhikkhunis. As I would expect an arahant to be above cultural and political pressures. Is this true about Mahakassapa? And if so, what could be the reason why? I don't think he was against bhikkhunis. I don't think he had any problem with women being, part of the sangha and all of that. I don't think that was good. In fact, Mahakassapa's